The muscle car era can be represented by how an old muscle car acts when you stomp on the gas. It got going in a hurry, but topped out almost as fast. Despite what some people say, the muscle car era started in 1964 with the release of the Pontiac GTO. As usual when a company does something successful, everyone else joined in. Then, as quickly as muscle cars burst onto the scene, they disappeared into the smog. I don't plan to dive into the nuances of when the muscle car era started, what a muscle car really is, or when and why they disappeared. That will be the focus of a future video, but for now let's get to the subject of this video. That subject is a 1965 Pontiac GTO with about 58,000 original miles. Prior to 1967, the only engine offered in a GTO was a 389, and that's what lies underneath that beautiful, albeit non-functional, hood scoop. Another false advertisement on the GTO was the engine displacement on the badges. It says 6.5 liter, the 389 cubic inches is only 6.37 liters. I never noticed this until I found out that late model 6.4 liter Hemis are 392 cubic inches. I don't know if this GTO has the original engine or not, because I've been too lazy to figure out which stamping number on the block is the one to compare to the VIN, or how much of it is supposed to line up anyway. The odds are that it is not the original 389, since the car sat in a barn for about 20 years. More on that later. The 389 was available with either a 4-barrel carburetor or a tri-power carburetor setup. For those unfamiliar with Pontiac nomenclature, tri-power means the same thing as 6-barrel in the Mopar world, or 3 deuces in colloquial terms. Whatever you call 3 2-barrel carburetors is irrelevant to this GTO, because it came with a single 4-barrel Carter carburetor. The Pontiac V8 has a relatively unique exhaust note with a very deep rumble even through stock manifolds and mufflers. As far as transmissions go, 65 GTOs came standard with a 3-speed manual, or could option up to a wide or close ratio 4-speed manual or a 2-speed automatic. This GTO has the auto, and no, it's not a power glide. It's a Super Turbine 300. The parts store will probably think that it is a power glide and give you the wrong parts like they did when we replaced the transmission pan gasket. That didn't stop the transmission leak, in case you were wondering. Then again, the transmission doesn't really leak. It vomits. There will be a period of no puddles of ATF, and then suddenly a giant pond of red liquid will appear underneath the car. Pretty much the only option on this GTO other than the Super Turbine 300 is power steering, which also needs to be fixed. In addition to the transmission issues, there was once a clunking noise coming from the rear of the car, which we assumed was the sagging rear coil springs. After replacing the springs with new ones from eBay, the noise wasn't gone. Next we thought the brakes might be sticking, so we replaced the old rotting rear brake line. That didn't fix it either. It ended up being a broken control arm. Broken as in it was almost cracked in half. The starter went out recently too. Old cars are a handful, if you didn't already know. It has drum brakes at all 4 corners with an unboosted single-line master cylinder. In simpler terms, it doesn't stop very well. The brakes have been worked on several times, most notably the time my dad and I removed the rear driver's side drum, and parts of the brake assembly fell off in the shop floor. It stops a little better now since the brake actually does something. The rear end is GM's 10 bolt, and it does not have a limited slip diff or an aggressive gear ratio. It also has original style bias-ply tires that team up with the wayward power steering to give this car a mind of its own, especially before the tires warm up. All these options, or lack thereof, are why I refer to this car as a granny goat. Goat representing one of the Pontiac GTO's nicknames, granny representing the lack of performance options other than being a real GTO in the first place. It also comes from the story that came with the car, and brings me back to the car sitting in a barn. According to the story from the person we bought the car from, the original owner of the car was an older woman. This could help explain the low miles, as older people usually don't drive as much. The reason it ended up in a barn for 2 decades after her ownership is beyond me. Whatever the cause was, the owner prior to us said his uncle bought the car out of the barn it was in and restored it after cleaning out years of chicken poop. Then the car found its way to the individual we bought it from, and he owned it and drove it for a while before deciding to retire and downsize. That brings us to the present day. Thanks for watching.